I gave my worst class a psychopath test. The results made me resign. I would rather stick my hands in a wood chipper than spend another day in an American high school. Anonymous teacher. I've been a teacher for 10 years, but yesterday I left the profession. I can't handle the stress of dealing with students anymore. My classes are growing more violent by the year, causing my hair to prematurely gray. The American education system has crashed and burned. Teachers are popping antidepressants like Skittles, and yet the public continues to ignore their plight. This trend must be stopped. By sharing my story, my goal is to reveal classrooms for what they truly are: war zones. My fourth period class started normally. Each student was respectful, they did their work, and arrived on time. But then Michael transferred from a neighboring high school in December and turned the classroom's dynamics on his head. Remembering Michael's first week in my class causes my heart to palpitate. Never before have I encountered a student so malicious. His interruptions and incendiary comments were calculated and always succeeded in derailing the class. It was as if he inherently knew how to rattle me. Every insult that poured from his mouth cut me to the quick and prevented me from teaching. Michael usurped me as the leader of the class by the first Friday. I might as well have spent the rest of the semester sitting in the corner wearing a dunce cap. My authority was useless. I was nothing but a walking joke to my students. They lost respect for me. And if I'm being honest, I lost respect for myself. However, Michael's first month in my class pales in comparison to his behavior this semester. His control over my class solidified over the holiday break. When school resumed in January, his behavior worsened to the point I was having daily panic attacks. For example, the first Monday back, he mocked my haircut for the entirety of the period. "What happened to your hair, Mr. Danielson?" he said, after walking in 5 minutes late. "You looking like the bastard child of a Sour Patch Kid and a Raggedy Ann doll. Even Oprah would roast that hairline." My cheeks turned bright red. Looked like my sentence variety lecture would have to wait. How could I teach with 32 15-year-olds doubling over with laughter right in front of me at my expense? "Please take your seat, Michael," I said. Michael strutted past his table and sat at my desk, an annoying habit of his. I watched with disgust as he lifted my coffee mug and took a long swallow. "I miss this class," he said. "My life is boring without you, Mr. Danielson. My Snapchat stories have sucked without pictures of your fat ass jiggling across the room." It took all of my restraint not to pick Michael up by his neck and hurl him across the room. Unfortunately, his mom was the principal of one of the district's elementary schools, so my hands were tied. He could murder somebody in the hallway and walk free. So I did my best to ignore him and slogged through the lesson. For the first time that year, I cried during the car ride home. If Michael's modus operandi would have remained insults and unruliness, I would have persisted until the end of the year. Integrity is important to me. I never back out of a contract lightly. However, Michael's behavior took such a drastic turn in February that I decided to resign. In other words, it was during this time that Michael started wearing his mask and exhibiting behavior so bizarre that my lungs constricted just the memory. When I first saw Michael in his mask, he startled me so badly I crashed into the wall. I had just unlocked my door and flipped on the lights when I noticed him standing in the corner behind me wearing a Scooby-Doo mask. "My goodness, Michael," I said, voice breathless. I could tell that it was him because of the neon yellow shoes he was wearing. "You scared me." He didn't respond. Instead, he remained motionless like a mannequin. Even his chest remained still as he sucked in wisps of air throughout the mouth slat. "Are you all right?" Still, no response. Just as I was about to walk over to him and pull off the mask, he pulled a timer from his pocket and dangled it in front of my eyes. I stared at the bright red numbers, eyes wide. 5 days, 12 hours, 13 minutes, and 52 seconds. If I would have known what was in store for me when the timer hit 0, I would have bolted from the classroom and never looked back. I blinked as the red numbers of the timer sent stars dancing across my pupils. "What's with the timer?" I said. Michael placed the timer back in his pocket and resumed his statue-like pose. I stood there watching him, trying to ignore the sense of dread rippling across my chest. "Michael?" He circled the classroom 3 times with precision-like steps, and then he took his seat and stared at the empty board. I remained by my desk, unsure what to do. Michael was always so loud. Why was he ignoring my questions? And what was with the mask? A myriad of questions flooded my mind all at once, causing my temples to pound. However, the bell rang moments later, and before I had time to fully process the situation, I had 31 sets of eyes trained on my startled face. Only Michael refused to look at me. He continued looking at the board for the remainder of the period as if it were conversing with him using words that only he could hear. The next 2 days passed the same way. Every morning I entered my classroom, Michael would be standing in the corner wearing his Scooby-Doo mask. He would thrust his timer in my face, and the moment I approached my desk, he'd walk 3 laps around the room, then take his seat. His mannerisms were so consistent that even the other students began to ignore him. Now, after the 3rd day of enduring Michael's act, I emailed his other teachers to see if he was behaving the same way in their classes. In short, he was, but only in my class did he ever carry a timer. This distinction sent alarm bells ringing inside of my head, so I called his mom, hoping that she could explain this drastic shift in his behavior. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I nearly called out that Friday. Michael's timer was only hours from striking 0, and thoughts of what he might do to me once it did plagued my sleep with brutal nightmares. However, after assuring myself that his behavior was nothing but a dramatic ruse, I forced myself out of bed. I had never allowed my students to bully me into calling out before, and I was not about to start. Much to my relief, Michael stayed home that day, and my 4th period passed blissful and in peace. When I returned home late that evening, I found Michael standing in the corner of my living room. The sight of his Scooby-Doo mask grimacing at me through the shadows caused my heart to leap. "What are you doing here, Michael?" I said. He ignored my question and instead pulled his timer from his pocket. 5 zeros grinned at me menacingly in bright red light. I don't know what's been going on with you recently, but it needs to stop. You're crossing a serious boundary here. I want to help you, so take off the mask so we can talk." Michael stared at me for a few moments, unmoving. Then he pulled a knife from his waistband. Dry blood caked the knife like rust. I took a step back. "Put that away. There's no need for violence." After gripping the knife so tightly his knuckles turned white, Michael lunged across the room. I blocked the blade with my forearm, just in time to prevent it from severing my jugular. Warm blood poured down my wrist, soaking my shirt. I pushed Michael to the ground and retreated upstairs. Pain clouded my vision and sent bright stars dancing in front of my eyes. My ears rang from the sound of the knife slicing through my flesh. Breathing heavily, I sprinted into my bedroom and slammed the door behind me. I then turned the lock and started pacing around the room, cringing at the sight of my blood on the carpet. My mind, it struggled to form thoughts. Michael's sudden appearance in my living room and his subsequent assault, it had startled me so badly that my limbs, they shook with adrenaline. Never would I have imagined a student invading my home and attempting to murder me in cold blood, regardless of how sour our relationship might be. Something drastic must have happened to him to cause him to behave so erratically. However, now was not the time to deliberate about what might be going on inside Michael's mind. My life was in danger. I needed to defuse the situation before I bled out on the floor. So I reached into my pocket to pull out my phone, and when my fingers brushed nothing but fabric, I slammed my hand against the wall. I had left my phone in the car and I didn't have a landline. A loud thud rattled the door in its frame. "This needs to stop, Michael," I said. "I know we've had our differences, but this is absurd. You're not a killer. Put the knife away before you hurt yourself." Michael jammed his knife into the door and splintered the wood. I could see the white eyes of his Scooby-Doo mask peering at me through the hole and shuddered. "I'm warning you, if you break that door, I'm going to defend myself." Another panel crumbled to the ground, and I could now see the entirety of his mask through the ruined door. "Don't do it, Michael, please. It's not too late to drop the knife." Michael reared back his leg and kicked down the door. The desecrated wood collapsed to the ground with a resounding crash and sent dust spiraling into the air. This dust reflected the burning redness of the setting sun drifting through the window, making it look like particles of fire. Michael, he charged me moments later, swinging his knife wildly. He connected with my ribs and sent the oxygen flooding from my lungs. I tumbled to the ground. Pain exploded in my chest as Michael dove on top of me. I could feel his hot breath upon my cheeks as I grabbed his wrist and tried to wrestle free his knife. After a few moments of violent tugging, I worked his knife loose. The moment I clasped my fingers around the worn leather hilt, I jammed the blade into Michael's thigh. He let out a guttural scream and rolled off of me, flailing his limbs in pain. So I jumped to my feet and I bolted from the room. I lumbered down the hallway, nursing my lacerated arm. My head felt light from blood loss, and my vision swam as if I had just drowned 3 shots of whiskey. I tightened my grip on the knife as I trundled down the stairs. Michael's hollering sounded angry rather than pained. If he didn't regroup and continue his assault within a few minutes, then my teacher's intuition had failed me. All that mattered was reaching my car. The police would be able to restrain Michael. I couldn't think of anything more horrifying than killing my own student. I prayed the situation wouldn't escalate to that point. My echoing feet did little to drown out Michael's thrashing. He pounded against the carpet with such force the chandelier hanging above my head swung violently through the twilight air. Michael barreled into the hallway just as I reached the bottom step. Other than a slight limp, he appeared to be at full strength. He was on me before I had time to react. Our bodies formed a jumbled mass as we rolled on the floor. Michael had produced another knife, and he was swinging it at me wildly. Within moments, I had over a dozen lacerations, which soaked my clothes in blood and set my heart roaring inside of my chest. Knowing that the little strength I possessed would soon pour from my body like water down a drain, I reared back my leg and kicked Michael in the stomach. Dopamine flooded my brain as the air scattered from his lungs and he rolled off of me. Seizing the opportunity, I snatched his knife and skewered his hand to the wall. He bellowed in agony as his tendons snapped and bones crunched, then fell unconscious. I scrambled to my car and called the police. What happened to Michael next, I don't know, and I don't care. Nobody has seen him since that night, and I doubt that he will ever receive the opportunity to return. I returned to school 2 weeks later. If I would have had enough personal days, I would have taken off for the rest of the year. Given how terrible staffing is at my school, I knew that they were desperate for me to return, despite the trauma that I had endured. So I steeled my nerves and I agreed to throw myself back into the grind. On a whim, I decided to give my fourth period class a psychopath test on my first day back. The results chilled me to the bone. I resigned the next day and refused to enter a classroom ever again.